Hey, everybody, welcome back to the news. Before we jump in, quick request, actually. We need your help on something. You may have listened to an episode that we did about, 4 months ago or so. Dr. Mike had the chance to speak with Łukasz Weintuch, who's on the Krakow City Council. We got a chance to talk about various things going on with politics in Krakow. Really interesting episode. Unfortunately, we did have some technical issues. It wasn't the best recording, and we reached out to him to kind of come back to our studio to do it in person, and he had a great idea. He wants to talk to us, but he would also like some questions from our listeners. And so we're asking you over the next couple of weeks. We don't know when this is going to happen exactly, but it's going to happen probably the late spring. So please use our email, go to our Facebook page, just get in touch with us and send us questions. Anything you want to know about local government, all the issues we talk about here on the show. So this is a chance to ask a question directly to a very, very high-ranking person in the Krakow city government. So we'll be collecting those questions over the next few weeks. And hopefully we'll get a chance to read your question when Łukasz Weintuch comes back or comes to our studio for the first time to talk about, as I said, local government politics and stuff like that. So please bear that in mind. So with that out of the way, we'll jump into the news this week. I'm here with Gabby is back. Dr. Mike is here. Josh is here. We got a few things to talk about this week. Not a whole lot going on, but a couple of interesting things. Okay, let's get this out of the way. Our weekly COVID update. We just learned a couple of days ago that effective today, as we record this, effective today, we're back in lockdown. We've lost the freedoms that we got, I think, back in January, which were taken away in November, or whatever.
They're no longer deemed worthy.
Whatever. Usual situation with hotels and shopping malls and restaurants. My question for you, Gabby, is at this point, does anyone care anymore?
No, I don't know. Well, I'm not really one for going to the shopping malls anyway, or shopping centres, should I say.
Shopping centres. Yeah.
Whatever.
Exactly. So I'm not really one for going to the shopping centres. I'm not a big shopper. So it doesn't really affect me, actually, so I don't care. I just want the pubs to open, please. And the restaurants.
Okay, we see where Gabby's priorities are.
If they took that away, I would be upset. But seeing as they haven't done that, I don't care.
Actually, they did take away the pubs. We're technically not allowed to go to a pub unless, you know a guy who knows a guy.
Unless you know the guy who knows a guy.
A very, very big deal. I didn't mention in the list I just gave a second ago, but a very big deal was the fact that school-age students, grades 1 to 3, have to go back to having remote classes. They started the year normally, then I think they had to start remote in November, then we went back in January, now we're back to remote. The government says this current lockdown, the current measures are in place until at least April 9th, which includes the Easter holidays. If you want to be pessimistic, I think there's a 50-50 chance that these rules, especially the remote lessons for the young children, could last until the end of the school year.
I think they will.
I'd like to remind people that children are usually less susceptible to the more serious forms of COVID. They don't spread it as much as they claim. Plus, also, the teachers were given priority when it came to vaccination. So why exactly they're being closed right now, the logic there escapes me.
Well, presumably they still spread it, and that's the main place where it's going to be. That's what happened last time. They sent everyone back to school. It spiked, then they closed the school.
Yes,
and
but
it came back down.
correlation is not causation.
Yeah, I know.
And there's so many other studies showing that it's not the schools.
I think maybe a related issue here, guys, is the fact that when these kids are in school, that means somebody, a parent or someone, has to, make the trip back and forth to take them or to pick them up. That means they have more contact in public. And so the more people who stay home, the more people who take care of those young people also stay home. So it's kind of the chain reaction. I guess maybe that's the thinking.
Because, in Poland, looking after kids is quite a big thing in the family, isn't it? So those kids are going to be going kind of all over the place anyway. Aunties, uncles, grandparents.
Well, that's true.
Well,
that's
actually,
true.
But you say that. But I mean, there's someone I kind of do school age. I do English conversation with, and she has during the previous lockdowns was not going to visit grandparents, which was pretty much a weekly occurrance. So I think within families they have.
I have a student who's
a couple of related stories to the lockdown thing. We don't want to talk about this forever. We're so sick of the COVID thing, but we have to talk about it from time to time. The first thing I want to mention is that as I said, the current restrictions go until April 9th at least. That includes the Easter weekend, which I forgot the dates exactly, but it's first week of April. So that means the
4th
Easter.
of April, I think, is Easter, yeah?
It's a fortnight from where we're recording.
Second is
isn't it?
Good Friday, I think, is it?
So the Easter market for the second year in a row, wasn't it canceled last year?
Yes, it was.
That means the Christmas market was also canceled, and they also have another holiday where they have the market in the Rennick. That would mean what? The Christmas market from 2019 was the last time
So depressing.
we had
isn't it?
this thing. Any thoughts on that?
Just
Apart
depressing.
from the obvious, we miss it.
It's one of those things that really bring out the atmosphere and the ambiance of the city. I mean, yes, there are no tourists now, and this is one of those things that's really geared towards tourism. But it does build up a sense of community that disappears when you don't have it. And let's not forget that there are people whose livelihoods depend on these markets. They've set them up. The people that run and sell the products. It's not like they have other businesses. These are, they go from town to town, from holiday to holiday, opening up these markets. And all of a sudden, for a year and a half now, they haven't been able to do
It's
that.
a sign of normality as well. We
Easter's
just
my
miss it.
favourite celebration as well, so it's doubly depressing for me. The sun's coming out, it's getting warmer. The food is fresher. People have more energy. It's just a nice holiday.
Well, it's the come down from winter, isn't it? You go, finally, you can sort of.
But come up from winter.
Well, yeah.
One more thing I want to mention about this has to do with Krakow's homeless population. Now, this has been a very politically difficult subject everywhere, basically in America. I've been following it in the UK as well. The question of testing them, potentially giving them vaccines. The same with prisoners and whatnot. And it's politically difficult for obvious reasons. People say, why should we be directing resources towards the homeless or prisoners when we could direct the same resources towards good people? It's tough. But Dr. Mike, the local authorities got some interesting information when they did some testing among Krakow's homeless population.
Yes, they tested several dozen homeless people for antibodies. So not the PCR tests, but just for the antibodies to see if they had been exposed to COVID in the past couple of months, and none of them had any positive reactions. So not even false positives. So it's very odd. So it either means they all got COVID last year and the antibodies have completely worn off, which is very unlikely, or more likely, none of them have had exposure to COVID over the last couple of months. They're outside, they're not wearing masks. People are staying away from homeless people, usually for obvious reasons, because even wearing a mask doesn't really protect you from the ambience. I like that word today.
Aroma.
That follows the homeless population around in Krakow.
Sorry to interrupt. Anybody have any thoughts on just generally the idea of, let's say, homeless and prisoners when it comes to COVID testing, COVID vaccinations? Should we prioritize them or do whatever the opposite of prioritize is?
What is the opposite of prioritize?
I don't know.
I don't know either. But I think.
What should we do with them?
Well, I think there's two different things here, because homeless people generally kind of wander from bench to bench and don't come that much into close contact with other people. That's the general understanding. Whereas prisoners are kind of by definition all confined together in a small space. And of course, it's not just the prisoners themselves, but the people who work there. And if you're in an environment, actually, this is one of the things that we pretty much know for certain with COVID, and this has been why it's been such a problem in hospitals, is when you have a high viral load, even people who might have a degree of immunity in normal circumstances, it just kind of breaks it all down. So I think actually, for the good of the greater population, prisoners should be vaccinated.
Priority or not?
Somewhere
Equal
between
priority.
Equal priority, not like in the first group or anything like that, but by age group, maybe the workers there. But I would say that you have to remember, when somebody's being imprisoned and confined because the justice system has deemed so that it's right for them to be confined, they're wards of the state, basically. Then the state is responsible for them. So like it or not, then they have to take care of their medical needs as well. And since they're in a closed-off environment, that increases the likelihood of disease spreading around.
Fair enough, Dr. Mike. But right now, maybe this will change later. But right now, we're in a situation where the vaccine is a scarce good. Right? It's in high demand because there's not enough of it, and we have to prioritize. So why should prisoners? And I'm just playing devil's advocate here. Why should prisoners be at the front of the line when decent people who've never had any trouble with the law in their 60s or 70s or whatever are waiting to get it?
I'm going to take issue with that slightly, with the point that you make about it's scarce and in high demand, because I read an article in The Spectator a couple of weeks ago, which was admittedly talking about the Polish diaspora in the UK.
Yeah, they're refusing to take it.
And they're refusing to take it. And the journalist writing the article, who was, judging by her name, is Polish. was talking more in general about the Polish, national psyche or whatever, and this resistance to things that appear to be untested or might have a risk of, yada yada. I don't know.
Classic Polish. Do this. No.
Well, yeah, it is. Don't throw me in the briar patch, isn't it? That's the kind of.
Didn't Poland also sell a bunch of vaccines? Right?
Yeah, I get your point. Yes, I mean, and I've read vaccines are being thrown away in some places. I get your point, but generally at the mega scale, we're still working overtime to get enough vaccines to market.
Meta scale,
not a meta scale. Sorry, whatever. Anyway, let's move on. Let's move on to one of our favorite subjects. Obviously, that's public transport and specifically tickets. Now, check this out. There's a story going around, and it involves, by the way, this story involves Łukasz Weintuk, who is the city council member that I mentioned at the top of the show.
Oh, coincidence.
So if you want to ask him about this specifically, send us a question, and we'll see if we can get him to answer it. Anyway, a little bit of background. We all know that there's an application, maybe more than one application, that you can use to buy a ticket when you're on the tram. And in Warsaw, the local authority there, the public transport authority there, noticed that when ticket controllers got onto a tram or bus and announced that, show us your tickets, checking tickets and whatnot, they noticed that people got out their phones very quickly and bought a ticket with the application, thus avoiding a fine, right? So, word of this got out, and now the Krakow city authorities, led by Łukasz Weintuk, as I said, our friend of the city council, they want to institute the following policy. It looks like this. They want to make it so that when you go to an application to buy a ticket for public transport, when you're buying the ticket, you have to enter the number of the tram. I don't mean like, tram 52 or tram 10. I mean the actual number of the physical car that you're in, because each one has a different identifying number. They're visible somewhere on the outside of the tram and someplace on the inside of the tram as well. So you have to enter specifically what car you're in. So you get your ticket, and then if the ticket guys step on the tram and say, okay, show us your tickets, then they can inform the driver, and somehow they can make it to where the application temporarily is unable to sell tickets for that specific tram because you're on it, thus blocking your attempt to, evade the ticket check. Guys, this sounds to me, first of all, completely insane. Who knows where the tram number is? When you step on the tram, who knows where this damn number is? Is it going to work? And this just sounds like, I see it from the city's point of view. They want to stop people from cheating, but no.
This seems kind of idiotic. Because a few people are cheating the system, they're going to make it more complicated for everybody else. We have different trams in Krakow, so even though maybe these numbers are clearly visible in some trams, they're not in the same place all over the place. I have read comments, and apparently before they had a QR system, which would make more sense, that you get on the tram with your app, and there's a QR code there that you could scan, right away, and you get the right tram number, everything, and you can just, press the button and buy the ticket. That would make more sense, and it's not all that complicated from a technical standpoint. They've also talked about years for bringing in like a system they have in London or in Australia when it comes to those, tap and pay kind of systems. It's not that expensive. The technology exists. It could be implemented very quickly, and that would solve so many problems very quickly with just having an NFC-style kind of payment system in Krakow.
Well, actually, funnily enough, I don't take the tram very often, but I was on one yesterday, and I pay for my ticket using
special occasion
Sky Cash, which is one of these apps. And when I was on the tram, inspectors got on.
Oh.
And so I was kind of, I have, shall we say, fresh experience of all of this. And the thing that occurs to me immediately when this is mentioned is, well, inspectors normally get on at a stop for fairly obvious reasons. And it's not just the inspectors that get on at the stop. It's also other people as well. So those people get on, and depending on how you set this up, they've got a very, very limited window to legitimately buy their ticket with their app.
And that's not considering the possibility of, say, a bad internet connection. We know of a lot of people using a phone. It's loading time. Did the payment go through or not? It's not like a 2-second thing. It'll take several moments or to a minute or two.
Well, for example, I think there are different things. But with Sky Cash, for example, what you can do is you can have like money on deposit, if you like.
Yeah, it's the same with Yakdoyada as well.
And you can also pay directly from your debit card. Mm-hmm. And I've found there have been occasions, and I have both, and there have been occasions when I would the first option is to pay off the debit card because that means you've still got your reserve in the tank, so to speak. And then for whatever reason, the connection doesn't work properly, or it doesn't work. It's like no, do this. So you have to rely on your reserve. So that then takes up more time. I mean, also I suppose it's a good way of snaffling a couple of extra free minutes.
I reckon they're going to do it though. They're going to do it.
Well, I think it's.
All they're going to do is
I think it's fundamentally wrong because hold on, because there's another point here, which is that the purpose of inspectors surely is to make it more difficult to travel for free, i.e. to avoid paying for something that does need to be paid for by someone somewhere along the line. Now, if inspectors get on, and I mean, you could argue this also about ticket machines as well, which, they now get immobilized or whatever, but if someone gets on and then they then buy a ticket, then, job done. The transport service gets its money.
I think the energy and the resources of the transit authority could be much better directed towards improving the functioning of the machines they have, which are always broken, by the way.
Yes.
Notorious that they're
and the number of machines. Remember last year, in July of last year, July 1st of last year, supposedly, starting on that date, every tram in the city was going to be equipped with a credit card reader. You could buy your ticket with a credit card. Well, surprise, it never happened. I'm constantly without cash. I'm sure I'm not the only person that rarely carries enough cash. I always want to pay with a credit card. I'm able to do so maybe, I don't know, one third of the time.
So what do you do the other?
And so I get to and sometimes I go to the machine at one of the stops and it's broken. The reader doesn't read the card, what have you. They need to make it easier to get the tickets for people who are willing to pay, are well-intentioned, not trying to cheat the system, but the technical end of things doesn't help us out. They fail, basically. I'm blaming them.
I think for me, far and away, the app is the best solution for precisely all of those reasons. I think a few months ago when I didn't have a working phone, and it was like, I need to get the tram somewhere. And I was like, oh God, I better make sure I got some coins because there may not be a machine that takes card. So I ended up going to the shop and buying some chewing gum, paying with a Tenswatty note, just getting some.
The thing is that you've got to worry about your phone running out of battery as well, because what if that happens?
I've said this before on the show. I still think it's true. The best system I've ever seen was about 20 years ago, I was in the Ukraine on this tram, and this little old woman physically walked up to everybody who got on the tram and either took she took cash. There were no credit cards there, but anyway, everybody paid. And she just kind of took a mental account of everybody who was on and off the tram and everybody who paid. She knew there was no way to take a free ride because she knew that you were on the tram with or without a ticket. That's still the best system. It's still, with all the technology we have, all the machines we have, all the credit cards we have, that is still the best system.
Cough minimum wage. Though.
So we need somebody on the tram either walking around with a change purse or like one of those credit card contactless credit card machines. That's the best way to enforce the highest rate of what's the word for
compliance.
The percent of compliance. Thank you. The people who are actually paying to be on the tram.
Yeah, but then of course you have to kind of
balance
out the lost revenue from people who cheat and the cost of having an extra employee on board the tram.
Or you could just
all the trams.
Or you could just use some of that Amazon technology where they monitor your, like in the stores without any actual cashiers, where they monitor your faces, what you're doing, so that when you walk into the tram,
that's what we
right
need.
away.
That's what we need, Dr. Mike.
Just microchip you and know where you go, and then
honestly, let's be honest.
They charge you.
Everybody.
Have you been vaccinated yet?
A contactless card. You can just have contactless card readers right at every door, just like you have Oyster readers in the UK, which work with contactless cards as well. You just swipe it, and it pays for that ticket at that moment.
Right.
And actually, you can have those on your phone as well.
Exactly.
Because if you can contact pay by phone, then you can.
Well, I guess let me summarize my position like this: they want full compliance or very high compliance, but they don't provide the machinery and the technical side of things to make that possible. Basically, that's my.
And they want to introduce a system that will make things more complicated. People are like, well, I could take a tram that cost me 6 zlotys, or I could pay 8 zlotys for my taxi for the same trip, or I could split it with friends.
It's funny you should mention that, Mike, because like an hour and a half ago when I was coming here to KrakCast World Headquarters at our studio on top of the skyscraper in the center of town, I was thinking I was running a little bit late. I can either spend 4 zlotys on a 20-minute ticket, which is the new price, or I checked Uber, it was $11.50. So I spent $7.50 more, and for that I got picked up, door to door, avoided walking through the cold, got here early in time to buy the cheap beer that I always get. So, the MPK, the Transportation Authority here in Krakow, should be thinking about things like that rather than the stupid idea about blocking the application and whatnot.
If only there was a tame counsellor we could speak to.
Exactly. If you want to ask Łukasz Weintuk, who is a proponent of this idea, by the way, if you want to ask him about it, like I said, contact us by our email address, which is on our website, KrakCast.pl, or at our Facebook page. Let's move on. Another topic we talked about some time ago. It's back in the news because it's been approved by the local city council, which includes Łukasz Weintuch. Another topic you can ask him about: in vitro fertilization. A budget has been approved to finance the treatment, let's call it, of 600 couples over the next. 600 couples a year over the next 2 years. The program is predicted to produce about 150 kids, which sounds a little creepy when I say it like that. The government is, financing kids, basically.
You water them every.
This is interesting. A couple of rules. Women, first of all, it has to be couples. No word on single women or lesbian couples or anything. It's heterosexual, presumably married. I didn't see it specifically, but I'd be curious to know. Age limit of 42 for women. No age limit for men. I don't think that's discrimination. It probably has to do with the chances of effective in vitro treatments. First of all, Dr. Mike, correct me if I'm wrong, but in vitro has a success rate of roughly 10%. Is that right?
That's true. But the thing is, when we say in vitro, it doesn't really describe the kind of method they're using. In vitro basically means, outside the body production of an embryo. So, you take the sperm, you take the egg, and outside of the body, you combine the two, so you get a baby. But yes.
He went to med school. Yeah.
But I'm trying to...
Is that shaken or stirred?
Wow. For those who can't see us, Josh is shaking up an embryo like a cocktail.
Yeah.
But the issue here is, one of the main reasons a lot of people are against in vitro is the fact that instead of doing one egg, one sperm, what they do is they sometimes take several eggs, several sperm, then they see what happens with these newly formed embryos, zygotes.
Multiple births.
That's one of the issues there, because sometimes they put in all the zygotes they produce into the mother, and sometimes one of those 12 is born, sometimes 6. But then there are other methods where they actually have them grown more or less on a petri dish for a while, and the ones that develop the most properly are the ones that are actually implanted. And this is the scenario where a lot of people have their moral qualms, like, well, what about these other ones that are more or less usually thrown away or frozen indefinitely?
But let me back up, Dr. Mike. Gabby, let me throw this at you. What just in general terms, what do you think about the idea of government, especially local government? I find it weird that it's not the national government, it's the city government. Anyway, what do you think about government effectively subsidizing childbirth and the creation of babies?
Well, it's weird because I thought it was illegal. Actually, I was under the impression that it was no longer allowed to be subsidized across Poland. When I was at the Czarny protest 4 years back, I was there with a colleague of mine, or maybe not a colleague, but someone I knew anyway, and she was in the process of applying for in vitro fertilization, and then that was taken from her. She was with her husband, and then she was never allowed to continue with it because of that process. So it's kind of weird that it's allowed in Krakow and not nationwide. I don't know what's going on there.
Well, this is what I sometimes argue. This is why I started talking about it earlier. It's because there's a lot of, right now, it's not a question illegal, but it's not legal to produce several embryos and throw out the rest. So you can have in vitro where it's 1-to-1, or all the ones that are produced are implanted.
Which is, of course, ineffective, because the best way to do in vitro fertilization is to have many embryos, you see how they develop, and then they gene test them as well. So the most healthy one will be implanted most of the time. I think, correct me if I'm wrong, but there can be quite a few issues with embryos through in vitro fertilization.
Let's get Josh in here. Josh, the same local government that says they constantly have to raise the price of tram tickets, for example, because of huge budget holes. That same city government has money to spend on medical treatments for couples, on treatments that has a 10% success rate. What do you make of this?
Well, the issue that the local council has with funding is presumably because insufficient people are spending money that is ending up in the pockets of the city council. And when you look at the first part of that, where I say insufficient people, one of the solutions is more people. And one of the ways that humans have learned how to do this over the millennia is by reproducing. And we know that the birth rate has been falling. I think in Poland it's comfortably below replacement rate.
I think it's 1.3 per woman. And
it needs to be like 2.4 or 2.6.
2.1.
2.1 is
2.1 is keep it even, yeah.
So, I mean, there are, and of course, there's things like pensions and, like other forms of social security. So there are very good economic reasons why you would want to invest in producing more children.
Essentially, you need to convince women that reproducing is kind of worth it, really. And at the moment, I'm not sure if it is in Poland. To be honest, it's kind of scary. I had like one friend. I don't have kids, but I had one friend who she was pregnant and she had to do things like order a epidural in advance of the birth because you can't just ask for it on the day. I had another neighbour of mine who was pregnant and said that in order to get a cesarean section, you can't just ask for it close to the time of birth. You've got to go and basically have some sort of diagnosis.
Yeah, but aren't those arguments for investing in motherhood, let's say, in the conventional way, the biological way,
yeah, probably,
instead of the scientific way?
They're not doing it either. So this is kind of like knee-jerk reaction. They wait till women are kind of old enough to need
150 kids a year. Is this even close to what Poland needs to fill its demographic hole?
This is several topics and issues overlapping here.
Yeah.
First of all, should the state be spending money on trying to produce more children when for the same amount of money you could be providing healthcare for people to extend their lives? So, it's like the same amount of money could be enough to provide, 20 more productive years of life for somebody else. Those are
Mike, productive years, though. I mean, if people are retiring and then being unproductive for longer.
But we're talking about the fact that, somebody in their 40s who needs chemotherapy and all of a sudden there's, lack of funds for that.
Okay, yeah.
And we know that chemotherapy will be, say, 60% effective for them so they can live to the ripe old age of 80. Or can you save the amount of money for a 1 in 10 chance of producing a child? Should the government be in that business to begin with, where it has to make this kind of choices?
That's a good question. I mean, of course, the most significant thing for me about the whole in vitro thing is that people want to do that because other opportunities have been exhausted. They don't work. So it's it's for people who very much want to have children and have been unable to.
One more thing I want to bring up, because they're saying families can't afford in vitro, but in vitro per patient per couple is from about 5 to 10,000 zlotys. I think the government are giving about 5 or 6,000.
2,500.
20. Yeah. So I think. Are you sure about that?
2,500 per couple.
Well, that's a little less than what I can.
That's like a quarter of, I think, the total bill. They're not paying for all of it. They're paying for it's a subsidized for the whole price.
This topic came up a few weeks ago, and a few weeks ago it was enough to cover the whole thing. But I know, on the private market, it's about 6,000 zlotys for in vitro in Poland. And I'll be blunt here. If you can't afford that, maybe you can't afford kids to begin with. Because
harsh but true, Mike. Harsh but true.
But you're going to get 500 a month as soon as the little sprog is sprung.
There's return on investment there.
I agree with your. That's a good point, Mike.
If you can't afford that, then really consider if you can afford a child at all. Though I don't think you should be looking at a child as can I afford it or not? No, it's more of a, do I want a child or not? Can I raise it properly? Everybody should want to have children, I would argue. And the financial burden of that it's just, eating food every day is a financial burden as well. You don't kill yourself because, food is expensive.
I agree with Josh when he says that, people in this situation are usually, they're desperate. This is kind of the last chance. They've already tried everything else and they've been working at this for whoever knows how long.
Yeah,
and my heart
2 years, I think,
really goes out to them. I mean, I used to, I think I mentioned this on our show before. I used to work in an office that was upstairs from a fertility clinic. And I'd see these people, on the staircase, of course, and my heart really goes out to them. Everybody who wants a child should be able to have one, and it's just a terrible tragedy that so many people are faced with this problem. So I'm on their side. I really, really am. But it's a fair question to ask, should the government be in this business, so to speak? Should they be spending money on this? And just really quickly, let me throw this out there. Dr. Mike, you mentioned earlier that you can produce a number of viable... What's the term? Viable
zygotes. Embryos.
Yeah. I always do this. I have to tie this.
Great name for a band, wouldn't it?
Viable zygotes. I have to tie this into what we talked about a couple of weeks ago with this family that had the sextuplets that keeps getting these endless subsidies from the government.
Oh, yeah.
If we're going to subsidize in vitro fertilization, it's inevitable that we're going to have a number of multiple births, twins at least, triplets and higher, right? If the government is in the habit of subsidizing, really generously subsidizing sextuplets and at the same time, financing activities that are going to increase the chances of another set of sextuplets. This is not financially viable. We can't do this. We shouldn't be encouraging people to have 6 kids at a time, even 4 kids at a time. Sorry, I love kids. We need more kids, but not 4 at a time.
But isn't that kind of a direct response directly because you're not allowed to do this multiple fertilization thing, like one at a time or all together? This is a result of the all together, put it in the woman and see which ones survive and not. If you have some screening and you do the healthiest one, it's more likely to survive. You don't need to worry about sextuplets.
Well, I'm just saying we can promote in vitro, or we can like throw lavish. Wait a minute, let me get my thoughts straight here. I think I confused myself. I don't think it makes sense to pour tons of money on this one family with sextuplets and then at the same time be dramatically increasing the chances that it could happen again and again and again. As we said before on the show, people who have twins get no support, triplets get no support, quadruplets get no support, but when you have sextuplets, you get millions. It just doesn't make sense. Dr. Mike, take over before I embarrass myself.
Well, I wanted to mention one more thing. When it comes to conception, on average, it's usually 1 in 6 actually come to term when it comes to babies. And only about half of those, the woman is even knows she's pregnant. It's the first few weeks, first few months, you don't know you're pregnant, and that usually doesn't even come to term. So, when you have a scenario where you're implanting a woman with 3, 4, 5 potential embryos, statistically speaking, the chance of just one making it through is very unlikely. Just that's a natural process of thing. Nature basically causes a few to, they aren't produced properly. So, this is a complicated issue, and we're going back to the fact, like, should the state be involved here at all? You mentioned earlier about the fact that you had a friend who, she had to ask for a cesarean section or an epidural. For me, that's another issue there about, state-sponsored healthcare. If the state is paying for it, you get what you're given. You don't have a choice, because if you want something else, then you go to the private health sector for that.
But then you just can't complain that the birth rate's dropping.
Well, for me, the birth rate issue is not an issue of financing. It's more of an issue of cultural change and shift. Everybody thinks it's a financial issue, but when they pump more money into it, it doesn't really cause more people to have babies.
It's not a financial. It's a safety issue. Women need to feel like they're in control of what's happening to them, and you're not going to do that if you go, well, actually, if you have problems or if you're in pain, you can't have this. Or
I don't think that can be argued as a reason for why why the birth rate in Western countries has dropped.
Much bigger cultural forces.
It's a cultural issue over the last 2-3 generations. Usually, when societies feel safer, they have less children, and we've gone to the point where that replacement rate has basically dropped below.
Bringing things back to this program here. What do you think about? I mentioned earlier, no word on if single women are eligible. I think it's a fair question. Aren't you curious to know if a single woman can say, okay, I want this subsidy to try to have a baby?
Yeah, it's an interesting question.
Lesbian couples. I think I know the answer to the question. I think the answer is no. But it's interesting that they said,
it's a finance thing, isn't it? Like, there's only a certain amount of money available. Who are you going to give it to? Okay,
well, that as well. But I think there are also, positions and cultural attitudes that may or may not be shared throughout the wider culture. That
I think it would be very, very unpopular if the council actually did that.
Dr. Mike said, there are a lot of issues here, and one of them is the morality. Are we going to force these couples to be married couples? Are we going to? Is it okay if they're in a long-term relationship but not married? Can we have a single woman who has a boyfriend who's willing to donate and help?
Maybe not even a boyfriend. Why not just the sperm bank?
Stranger. Yes,
there are too many issues here involved. That's why one more argument I would be against having the state pay for this to begin with.
You pause. All right, and one more thing to cover before we wrap things up today. Gabby, I know this hit you very hard emotionally this week when we learned of the closure of a Krakow institution. What was it called? I call it the Cat Cafe.
Cat Cafe?
Cat Cafe on Lubitsch Street, right across from the train station. It was there for I don't know how long, but a good number of years. Finally closed down. Tell us the tragic history the tragic story of the ending of the Cat Cafe.
I think originally there was a location, and then there was another location on Lubitsch, and people used to go there to drink coffee amongst cats.
How is this possible with the health department?
There, you enjoy the cats.
How is this possible?
They come and say, because they have a separate kitchen where the cats are not allowed.
Yeah, but they're walking all over people. There's hair everywhere. How can you have a cafe with animals walking around?
That's why people go, to sit amongst the animals.
I don't know how you can enjoy coffee in the company of cats. They have a peculiar, stench to them, and which doesn't really mix well with the aroma of coffee.
Mike's not a cat person.
Well, the way it worked was that you had the coffee area where the humans and the cats would cohabit.
Humans.
The humans and the cats cohabited the coffee
What kind of cafe
area.
was this?
And then there was a separate section.
Where did the
that was
aliens
just for
sit?
cats. Once the cats had enough, they...
Where did the elves sit and the dwarves?
No, elves were just little cats.
Couldn't resist. Okay, go ahead.
So, there were trees that they could climb and you could watch them playing with each other. There were toys hung around, little mouses that you could throw at them.
And
They could come and
that's
sit on your
enjoyable?
lap. Yes, it's very calming.
Could sit in the corner and skin up some
Make new
catnip.
friends.
Gabby, I told you before we started recording, I told you that I've heard of restaurants in Krakow that have been shut down by the health department because they didn't have a special room for eggs, or they didn't have a special sink to wash a certain kind of dish or whatever. And
We're done with in vitro.
A cafe with cats everywhere is okay? How was that? I don't understand how this is possible.
Well, you just keep the cats separate from the food. It's not that hard. You have a separate room.
How do you do
where the
that?
food
They have
is.
hair and what do you call it? The dander, it's in the air, it's
Look,
everywhere.
I have a cat and I go places, and I'm not contaminating. Although I am kind of shedding on your sofa right now.
Be showing up the past half hour here already.
I have a lot of cat hair on my shirt.
Josh, would you go to a cafe that had, for example, little dogs running everywhere? Would you be okay with that?
Puppies.
Puppies.
No, not at all.
Dr. Mike?
For me, I despise cats, but if it's a choice to go there, fine. I would hate somebody who say, "Hey, let's meet up for a coffee or let's meet up for beer." It's like, okay, where are we going? Oh, the cat place. Fuck you. So this is a place where if you are a cat lover, you can go there and meet with other cat lovers. But it's not a place.
Anymore. You can't now.
Gone. No, I'm not crying any tears here. I can understand it's more for, say, exotic animals, like with
Tigers.
Well, that'd be cool. Or for parrots or
People from the Orient.
or animals that you.
Ferrets. Have you smelled a ferret?
Ferrets are horrible animals.
Ferrets stink, man.
But I'm
Horrible.
trying to just say that I could.
Smelling.
I'm trying to say for
maybe it would-
an animal that you are less likely to come in contact with otherwise. So I can understand that more. I wouldn't like it, but I can understand it more. But cats, I don't like going to homes of people with cats because you walk in and they say like, "Oh no, we have the freshest type of kitty litter. You won't notice the smell." You walk, right away. There's no getting around it. There's that weird kind of urine back of your mouth ammonia smell.
Mike, you might need some therapy on this subject. I think there's something behind this hatred for cats.
Why don't you like pussy?
What was that?
I would expect him to say that. Gabby. So if this place reopens somewhere, or if a new cat cafe opens up, they can count on your support? Is that
They can. I've been before. Their hot chocolate was never hot. But I didn't go there for the hot chocolate. I went there for the cat, so it didn't matter.
All right. Well, I guess there are people like you who are sad that the cat cafe is no longer here. I'm not one of them. Dr. Mike is obviously not one of them. Josh?
Prior to the prep for this show, I'd never even heard
You never saw
of
the cat cafe on Lubitsch.
You
never
missed
saw
out, mate.
I don't.
It was lovely.
I don't travel along Lubitsch very.
No, it
There's no, if I'm going to yours, I wouldn't go along
that's
Lubitsch,
true.
for example.
That's true. Well, I was there for, I would say, maybe a decade.
Yeah, it was there for a good long time.
A good long time, anyway. Another Krakow institution gone. Oh well. Well, we're going to wrap things up on that feline note here. KrakCast.pl. All of our back episodes. Don't forget what I said about your emails, your messages, questions for city council member Łukasz Weintuk. Anything you want to ask about in vitro fertilization, tram ticket, stupid ideas, various things. Get in touch with us. We're going to make that happen. I think probably in a month or 6 weeks. And hopefully we can read any questions you might have for him. And anyway, thanks again, and we'll catch you next time on the news.